on this edition of the Self-Publishing Show.
It's onerous work. To me, it's the delight of taking this mine that you've created and then digging out more gold, polishing all the facets into it that you can.
Publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers, no more barriers, no one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and first-time author James Blatch as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome. It is the Self-Publishing Show. I'm James Blatch.
And I'm Mark Dawson.
Episode 302, Mark. Now we know our episode numbers. Lots of podcast people do their episode numbers at the beginning, don't they? Say that. But we're more of a chapter.
No, I think that's generous. We're just not organised.
Shut up. Now, I've got a question for you on chapters. Before we do our Patreon supporters, Thank you very much indeed. We're going to welcome you personally in a moment. I do quite a lot of book formatting these days, and I was reading a blog post actually on whether you should use chapter titles or not in your contents. Do you use chapter titles in your contents or not? Because you can tick a box in Vellum and I'm sure other formatting software.
How do you mean give the chapter a title?
Yeah. So basically you give the chapter a title, or if you tick the box in Vellum, it uses the first, if you've got anything above the line, the first paragraph. So you might have the date or something like that, depending on how you've written your book. I prefer just seeing chapter, because I don't know how many people use a chapter list in reality anyway, but it looks messy and clumsy to me to have all the chapter names there. But some people seem to think it's a better thing to do.
Well, that's a different question there. So we're talking about do you use chapter headings or chapter names? No, I do not. That many writers do these days.
So it's not relevant.
Vellum allows you to you could have chapter 1, James goes to the shops. Chapter 2, James walks the dog.
It's a good book.
Which sounds like a very exciting book, but you could have that as your headings in your contents page, but that's a fairly old-fashioned way of doing things. There aren't that many. It's more of a literary fiction kind of conceit.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, you don't see it often in the books that I read and write.
I think I may have done it in my book because my book is chronological. Every day, you don't miss a day in my book. It's so.
Yeah, I do that too. But I mean, most of my Milton books take place sequentially over a course of 7 or 8 days, and I do it by part. So part 1 Monday, part 2 Tuesday, and then the chapters are just chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. Okay. But I don't give them any more detail. Now, the book I'm writing now, Wormwood, given that it's set in '86 around the Chernobyl disaster, what I'm probably going to do is kind of a reverse chronology. So it'll start, April the 20th, 6 days before the explosion, because anyone who's reading it will know that obviously it's going to explode. We won't be surprised to anyone that the nuclear power station is probably going to have an accident.
Like writing a book set on the Titanic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the 2 days from iceberg. That works quite well, because I think doing it that way will crank up the tension, because it's something that will be quite exciting to read is coming up, and so that's the ticking time bomb, if you like. But I won't, beyond the parts being 6 days before the explosion, the chapters won't have any more detail than that.
All right. Well, I thought I'd ask that, but it suddenly was on my mind and I thought I might forget. But now we can formally start by welcoming our new Patreon supporters. Would you like to do that, Mark Dawson?
Yes, I will, James Blatch. So hello to Peter Doyle from Dublin and Damien Vargas from Malaga in Spain. So thank you very much to Peter and Damien for joining several hundred others on Patreon who make it a lot easier for us to put this slick podcast together, where we don't even know the numbers of our podcast episodes. 302. Yes, that's right. So thank you very much to Peter and Damien.
You're going to talk about your book, not Wormwood, which makes me think of Wormwood Scrubs, the title.
I've told you before what Wormwood means, haven't I?
Is it?
I'm sure I've mentioned it on the podcast. Wormwood, Chernobyl in Ukrainian translates as wormwood, meaning the plant, but also, and Ronald Reagan picked up on this back in the 80s, the Book of Revelations contains reference to the meteor that heralds the beginning of the apocalypse, and that's called wormwood. So his opinion was that Chernobyl had been ordained in the Bible as something that was going to happen.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, it was one of those moments when I read that. I was like, "Yep, that's the title of my book." It was there's absolutely, that's been the title for about 2 years. So yep, here comes my dog.
Here comes
so,
Scout. Anyway,
apologies, listeners, if you hear woofing, it'll be our Scouts looking out the window.
I did want to ask you about your launch, how that's gone, and also a little bit about the writing that I know you're getting into now. So the launch has gone, I think, pretty well looking at the charts.
Yes, the launch has been really great. So I mean, it had 12,000 full price pre-orders, something along those lines, which obviously is wonderful. But what usually happens is that it will launch reasonably successfully because not everyone likes to pre-order. So you'll have maybe 2,000 or 3,000 who go and buy it on the day it comes out. And then it will slowly kind of drift out of the charts. But this one hasn't done that. So it's 8 days and it's been in the top 100 for 8 days now at full price, which is really great. That's in the UK, doing pretty well in the US, top 500, I think, and seems quite sticky. So I'm really pleased with how that's gone. Not entirely sure why. It may be that it's appealing to people beyond the series, and it's quite visible. So people are taking a chance and who haven't read Milton before, perhaps. So that's great because if it is doing that, then obviously it's introducing character and my writing to new readers.
Yeah, but it could be the knock-on effect also of being visible in shops in the UK because there's an audience there who would be introduced to
possible.
you. And people who read Peter James and the usual stuff, people who sit on those shelves all the time. And I've read that he only does one book a year, I think now. They've moved on to you because you were there. And now you've released a new one. You might be picking up new audience that way. So, which just goes to show when you're signing that deal, and I don't know the ins and outs of that deal, but being a trad deal is probably not as lucrative as you uploading and selling your own book, but there's hidden benefits, and this is one of them, isn't it? That visibility.
Yeah, no, it's an unusual deal, and it's a hybrid joint venture between me and another company, so it's nothing like a traditional publishing deal at all. But yeah, absolutely, it is definitely getting me into bookstores. I mean, it's in lots and lots of bookstores now. I had an email from Jasper Joffrey actually the other day asking how I'd got the book into the W.H. Smiths at Heathrow.
Huh.
I think he knew how I'd done it, but there's just a good indication that it is getting into lots and lots of different places, which does introduce me to new readers who probably don't buy on Kindle, or they may buy on Kindle. It's all it's all good publicity for the books.
Yeah, and you're cracking on with the next Milton, which, as you said, is called Wormwood, and it's set. No, it's not Milton.
That's not Milton. No, that's Milton would have to go back in time to be in that one. So no, this is a standalone in the same world. So there's a couple of characters that readers will recognise, but it's one of those moments. It's been a really good writing, probably the best week I've had for getting words down in a couple of years. So I've probably done 25,000 words this week, which is
great,
really, really good for me. 25,000, so that's exceptional. And the reason is just because I'm very enthusiastic about it. The research is fun. I've rewatched the Chernobyl series, the HBO show, which is just ridiculously good. Reading some really good non-fiction, kind of narrative non-fiction stories on what happened maybe 10 years before and then in the immediate aftermath, so I've got loads and loads of material that I'm able to refer to. And characters are good, and it's fun to write about. It's a fairly scary event for those who are old enough to remember it, but it's also it's fun to learn what happened and to twist it take in a slightly different direction. So it's not quite it's the kind of tagline will be, what if it wasn't an accident? So that's quite fun to think, how could I sabotage a nuclear reactor?
Interesting. Well, that's good. And funnily enough, I've had a good writing week as well. Not as good as yours, but a good one, on the back of a conversation we had in London last weekend when I told you I was a bit stuck and sort of finding myself not going back to the writing because I knew I'd got to a point where I wasn't sure how to do the next bit. And you said just jump ahead, which is such an easy piece of advice, and a bit of advice I would give somebody who asked me but hadn't properly occurred to me. And so I jumped ahead, started writing the last third of the book, which I love, and immediately had 2,000 word days in a row, which was brilliant on the Monday and Tuesday. So,
yeah, that's a good tactic. If you're stuck with something, then just if there's something that you want to get to, just go and write it and then come back.
Yeah,
I often find that I get bits. I might get stuck on a slight plot point. I'm not quite, doesn't feel authentic, or there's something that I'm not quite happy with. So I'll go forward, write something else, and then in the meantime, I'm always thinking about fixing the problem that I've had. And by the time I've finished the bit that I jump ahead to, I've usually solved the problem that was giving me issues before. So yeah, you know, sequentially, not a good idea sometimes.
It's good for me because I need, in this particular story, like my last book, really, the relationships and the characters need to be in a certain place in the last third, a certain point of sort of desperation or love or whatever it is, and a bit of that going on in my book. And getting when you're writing the story and the character development sort of get in the way of each other sometimes, and you've got to, the story has to be the driver of the character, and the character has to be the main thing. But you're still writing the story, and things are happening, and it's quite difficult sometimes, I think, to remember where you need to end up. So writing where you need to end up, having that down, focuses my mind a bit more. And when I go back, I think like it doesn't really matter about X, Y, and Z. What matters is this conversation and this moment in their development. So yeah, I think it is going to work for me. I mean, I was aiming to hand over the completed first draft at the end of this month. I've agreed with my editor that he's going to get probably about 60,000 words of it. But that's, in fact, as it turns out, he'll get 60,000 at the beginning and 25,000 at the end, which is going to be good. So he'll be able to give me good developmental feedback on that. Mm-hmm. Good. And then I will be finishing the draft and into the revision stage, which, funnily enough, in a lovely segue, brings us on to today's interview, which is with Tiffany Yates Martin, somebody very experienced from the old days of the big, big six traditional publishers in the old days, through to today where she works with lots of indie authors as well. And she is a bit like Jenny Nash, our resident editor, we might want to call her. Tiffany has a vast wealth of experience in particularly developmental editing and revision. And she has lots of tips and advice for how you can get yourself into the correct frame of mind with the correct methodology to revise your manuscript effectively. But also she talks a bit about how to hire an editor, some steps you can take to make sure you are getting the right match of an editor. So let's hear from Tiffany Yates Martin.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Tiffany Yates Martin, welcome to the Self-Publishing Show. Lovely to have you here. You're looking very bright and breezy. In fact, I don't even know where you are, except I know what time zone you're in. You're in Central. So was that
I am, and
Colorado or something?
6 hours earlier. It's broad daylight at 1 p.m. and I'm in Austin, Texas.
Are you in Austin?
And thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Is it 1 p.m.? Because I thought it was 3 p.m. I got that time wrong, but you knew.
Yeah, you said that and I got super confused I literally had to look it up to make sure I had the time right.
Wow. Well, I'm pleased. Well, I'm pleased you didn't listen to me, which is a good tip in life. Okay, look, here we go. We're going to talk about editing. Tiffany, let's start, as I always like to with these interviews, so we can learn a bit about you. You better tell us how you got to where you are today in terms of publishing, Tiffany.
Well, I started a long time ago in the early 90s. I was an actor at the time. Actually, I was an English major for no reason except I had a lot of English credits. And so I thought, well, this will get me out soon. But I always thought I would be an actor, moved to New York, and I was doing that. And, actors are mostly waiters, which I was. And we mostly don't make a ton of money, which I wasn't. And so when I was doing a lot of regional theater, I was looking for something I could do. We didn't call it this then, but like my side hustle. And so in the newspaper, I saw an ad that said, get paid for reading books in the classified section of the New York Times. And I thought, I'm sure this is a scam. I was a starving artist. It was $25 that I had to afford, but I took a chance on it. And darned if it didn't tell you how to go about becoming a freelance copy editor or proofreader. So that's how I started. And I worked with most of the big six at the time. I started as a proofreader. I moved into copy editing. I did that for maybe 12 or I guess 15 years. And then about a dozen years ago, I moved into developmental editing, which is what I do now. And I work with major publishers. I work directly with authors. I work with everyone from like multi-published best-selling authors to newer authors and classes, online courses, webinars, that kind of thing.
Great. So you learned the trade on the job, really, reading book after book after book. And I guess you became... Mark and I and John watched films for a living for 7 years, classifying them in the UK. And I've never been to film school or done a film course, but I'm pretty film literate because I watched 5.5 hours of films 5 days a week for 7 years. And I can tell you straight away whether a film works or doesn't work and what they've done to do to get it right or wrong. I guess you learn the ins and outs of novels just by reading them.
It's funny you say that. One of the things I talk about and teach a lot is I call it how to train your editor brain. And the best way to do that is by taking in other people's stories because you're objective. You have that built-in editor brain where you don't have that in your own work. That's the hardest thing about editing your own work is you're filling in all the blanks. So watching other people's stories, reading other people's stories, but not just passively the way we do, when we're couch surfing, but like you described, watching it and analyzing it, dissecting it, breaking apart the story. Why does it work? What's effective? What makes it effective? Why am I reacting the way I'm reacting?
And in those early days in New York, when you were proofreading, did you start to get to a stage where you wanted to say, oh, I wish they hadn't done this with the hero? Because the proofreader's job is fairly... In fact, we should define the editing roles. Let's do that at this stage. People who are confused about a development editor and a copy editor and a proof editor. Can you just quickly give us the brief of who does what?
Oh, what an excellent question. Yes. And the frustrating thing is that a lot of these are fluid definitions and not everybody uses all the exact same definitions. But as I understand it, as I have been in the business, as long as I've been in the business, developmental editing is like the big picture, high level, absolutely everything. It looks at structure, plot, characterization. It looks at how effective the story is on the page. It looks at suspense and tension. Is point of view solid? How's the momentum? Every single element of story. And it helps the author. Basically, I always say it holds up a mirror for the author to see what they actually have. That's what a good edit should do. And you're so right about learning to do it from other people's work because that's there's so many people right now who have started editing because it seems like a great fit if you love books or you're a writer, but you do have to sort of learn on the job. So that was great training for that. And then copy editing is, so let's just put it in the scheme of things when you're writing. You'll finish your draft to the best of your abilities. And then probably the first place it will go will be a developmental editor. And that's what I just described. And then hopefully when you get published or you're publishing yourself, you will have it copy edited after that. And that's the nuts and bolts. That's the punctuation, spelling, grammar, fact checking, consistency, a little bit of word usage, echoed words, stuff like that, any of the technical stuff, but also a little bit of, which I'll go into next, line editing, which is have you said what you are saying in the most effective way? And have you said exactly what you think you're saying? Because sometimes we have it with, dangling modifiers or just a near miss of a word choice. You're not quite expressing the thought you think you're expressing, and a good copy editor will spot that. A line editor will spot that sort of thing, but they'll also work on more of a kind of a creative level with you where they're just looking at the prose itself and they're helping you make sure that you are expressing your thoughts as concisely, effectively, lean, clean, precise as possible. And then a proofreader is after that. Back in the day when I used to do this at first, proofreading was when copy edits would get typeset onto galley pages, and then you would painstakingly compare the galley pages to the author's manuscript and literally word by word, punctuation by punctuation, make sure everything got transferred. With electronic files now, I don't think it probably operates that way. My assumption now, and I haven't done it in a long time, is, and you can probably tell me better than I can because you just did this so recently. Proofreading, I think now is just that final pass to make sure everything got incorporated and there's no typos, nothing got left out.
Yeah, that's pretty much describes the process that I went through. Proofreading was getting the commas in the right place. It was the last fix on things like speech. That bit where you introduce a speech with a comma or a full stop, which I still get confused about, fixing that. The copy edit one was the interesting one. So development editing, from my experience of doing exactly that, you described it very accurately. So development editing was that. This is what I think works. This is what I think doesn't work. So I think the story, the characters, internal, external, all that stuff gets done then. Then you basically rewrite the novel effectively after that discussion. That's what I do anyway. The copy editing I thought was really interesting because it's quite a wide-ranging brief. You end up doing some of that proof stuff, because the copy editor is not going to ignore an incorrect speech thing, even if that's not really what their main thing is. But they'll very occasionally, they'll say things like, that didn't make sense to me, I don't know what you mean here, which is a great note for a writer, because you think you've expressed your thoughts clearly, and they're saying, I don't really know what you mean here. Then they'll say, do you mean this character rather than that character, or you've made mistakes? But they'll also do some brilliant little, you said on page 12, this was on that document at the top, but now you're saying this is on that document at the top. And that's in that sort of, I found that a really, really useful service on my manuscript. The copy editing, I think, was the most fun bit for me and most useful bit.
I think it is. Well, I found it fun to do because I'm a little bit left-brained and OCD, which are great traits to have for a copy editor.
Yes.
But I also think it's fun to have done. I also write under a pen name, and I just finished the copy edit stage. And you're right. It is fun because, first of all, you get to correct all the little things that every reader would have written in to tell you got wrong. And it's stuff you would never think about, like this song, you have it coming out in the summer of, their senior year. Well, it didn't get released until the year after that. Or as you said, like stuff from 100 pages ago that they remember and call out that saves you from inconsistencies.
Yeah. And we should also say, whether you work for Stodder or Penguin or yourself, you won't get everything.
You won't.
You won't.
I don't get everything, and
No.
I did it for 15 years. I have to have a copy editor.
You don't get what I'm saying is, even through this process, you won't get everything. And
it amazes me.
Readers will still find stuff, and it's infuriating. But I don't care if you're a published Big Six or whatever it is now, Big Four author or self-published, and you've worked really hard on this stage. It's a funny thing, but some stuff just gets through, doesn't it?
Not just that, but all the job descriptions I just mentioned, all those people look at a manuscript before it's published. If you're getting traditionally published, if you're getting, this done for yourself, you're at the very least probably, hopefully, getting a copy editor. I would say that's indispensable for self-publishing. Who knows how many of your friends have read it? Who knows how many other editing services you hire? But especially in a publishing house, the number of eyeballs on this thing, the fact that anything gets through has always amazed me, but that's just, I guess, human error.
I spot typos in traditionally published books reasonably often. And I suppose that leads us on to why this is so important. It's so important not to think you can do this yourself, because some errors are really hard to spot, and your brain works very cleverly at it's like that. It's occasionally you see these sentences that are deliberately wrong, but you can't see them because the "there's" in two places. Your brain spends its all day. Your brain is making sense of what it sees and trying to order it so that it makes sense of things. And of course, it's trying to correct things before you even notice it. That's its job, which is why you can't see your own errors a lot. So I completely agree. Copy editing is a minimum. Would you say proof editing is a compulsory really for even self-published authors as well?
I always hesitate to say anything is compulsory because, I hate to put up a financial barrier for people who want to get their work out there. But I would say if you're going to save your pennies for anything, copy editing will be money incredibly well spent. A proof would also, you're competing with every other published work out there from every other company that will be very polished and look good and not have errors in it. And readers can be pretty unforgiving, and you can have a fantastic story, but if it's riddled with typos, or you're missing big chunks of text, or, you've got word usage wrong, it can put somebody off your story. They won't get far enough in to stay hooked because it makes us aware of what we're reading and we disengage.
Yeah.
So I would say if at all possible, I often think that proofreading can be done by the author, but that could be me saying that because that's what I used to do and I have a pretty sharp eye for it. So I don't know. About that one.
Yeah, it's difficult. I think it's difficult to proofread your own work. I think
you are filling everything in, as you said.
Yeah,
you're blind.
Yeah, you're working against that instinct for your brain to cover things up for you. Well, that's certainly my view. Is where I am at the moment. Development editing is compulsory as well because I'm still at that stage of learning how to tell stories, and I want to talk to you a bit about that. We'll perhaps come back to copy and proof towards the end of the interview, but development editing is almost a size apart from those other two. It's a different beast altogether, and you must have discovered that moving from the more technical editing to this. artistic editing, would you call it? I mean, it's more holistic editing.
I do.
That's a better word.
It's funny. I have a book, Intuitive Editing, and the subtitle is A Creative and Practical Guide to Revising Your Writing. And that is exactly how I think of editing. It's both creative and very practical. So you want somebody, and you can also learn some of the skills yourself to get very good at editing your own work. It's still hard to see it really clearly, but it uses both sides of your brain. So I do think it's creative. Yeah.
So how did you find your first development edits, and when did you feel you were qualified to do it? What point did you think I can talk to authors about structure and so on?
The cool thing about doing copy editing for that long, as you said, is that when it got to me, this was back in the day before electronic everything. So I got galley pages with red pencil on them and Post-it notes. And so I got to see every single thing that had been done to a story prior to my getting it. All the edit passes, all the changes authors had made. It was an incredible learning experience. So that helped. But the thing that really told me I probably was going to be able to do a decent job at it was I joined a writer's group, and I learned as much from editing other people's work and assessing whether it was working and helping them figure out where it might not be as effective as it could be, and realized that was a way my brain worked. And that's another reason I say the more you can do that, not just by analyzing other story, but if you can put yourself in a position where you're actually giving people feedback on their work, whether that's a critique group or a writer's group or a critique partner. A lot of back in the day before COVID, when we would go to conferences and they'd do R&Cs, oh my God, now I'm blanking on what R&C stands for. Something in critique. Review and critique. No, it's not coming to me. But anyway, it's when agents or editors will live take pages from attendees and read through them and then go through and say what's working, what's not working, what caught their attention, when they disengaged. It's really harsh. Reading critique. I knew it would come to me.
Reading critique. There you go.
It's really harsh especially if it's your work, but they often let you sit in on a bunch of people's work and it's basically anonymous. And you get to hear what these professionals, what their impressions of the writing are and what works for them and what makes them put it down. That's incredibly helpful. So yeah, getting to do all that was fantastic training ground. And then the way I first started doing it, I'm a scrappy little thing. So as I said, I kind of came in the back door with copy editing and proofreading with my little pamphlet. And then when I decided to start dev editing and thought I might be good at it, I didn't have any credits. I didn't have any experience. I didn't want to say to somebody, give me thousands of dollars, which, as you know, is what an edit will cost for me to edit for you. So I happened to know I knew a lot of authors from being in the business so long, having worked with them as their copy editor. And one author was from Austin, and I had just moved here and I had befriended her, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to ask her. She had a new book out or a new manuscript she was working on, and she had been talking about it. I said, I will dev edit this for free for you. She had nothing to lose, right? Like it could have been terrible and then she could just throw it away. So I did it and it just turned out very well. She was incredibly pleased. She told everybody she knew, and that just snowballed.
Yeah.
And then little by little, then this was all during the time when publishing was changing more than I've seen it in my entire time in the business. You had all these smaller publishers, and then you had Amazon, and everything was different. And so little by little, I started moving into working with publishers, and then agents get to know you and, they'll pass your name along to clients. So yeah, again, I kind of came in the back door with that. With tons of experience, which is so helpful. there's no way to learn except by doing it.
It sounds like perfect timing because, as you say, the publishing world has suddenly exploded. And actually, from then, I guess there were freelancers working in editing and so on in the old days, but now it's a huge industry around self-publishing and small hybrid publishers.
I don't remember it being like it is now. It's a whole industry now that I don't ever remember existing before. I don't know that I could have created this career the way I've created it 20 years ago, but I also don't know that I could have taken it to where I've taken it now without having had, I didn't come up within the publishing industry because I never worked at a publishing house, but I've worked with them for all this time. And you get to see how the process works and get so much experience. And and credits. That was a huge help too. By the time I started this business, I got really lucky as a copy editor. I was working with Walter Mosley and Pat Conroy. I say working with, that's very grandiose. I was copy editing them, which basically means don't change a whole bunch because it's Walter Mosley or whoever.
Yeah.
But it was like this stuff goes on your resume and suddenly you have instant credibility. Even though it's an adjacent skill, it's helpful. It's helpful for when people see, oh, okay, she's actually done, this kind of work with these people. So there's some measure of professionalism and experience there, which is something I always encourage authors to look for when they're hiring people.
In terms of the business side of things now, I mean, how busy are you? And I often think it's one of those jobs where there's a finite amount of time that you've got.
Yeah.
So you either put your prices up, I guess, or you can't, or you can't, or clone yourself in terms of expanding.
It was funny. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, my book came out, and I stay very busy, and I like to stay very busy. I'm working with publishers who are giving me projects, but I also try to work directly with authors, and then I always want to try to keep spaces to work with authors I've worked with before, who may suddenly go, "Hey, I've got a title." So that always stayed very busy. But then the book came out, and it went next level, which I hadn't expected. And overnight, I kind of had to redefine what my business was. So that was when I started moving into, I'd always done like conferences and workshops and that sort of thing, and I love it. So I started doing a lot more of that kind of thing, especially in the pandemic when everybody was stuck at home. It seemed like first thing I did was create a big free webinar, and I contacted every conference I had worked with and said, this is a terrifying time and a lot of people aren't able to write right now, but there's stuff you can do for your career that doesn't involve writing. It involves doing what you're doing. Remember at the beginning of the pandemic where we all freaked out and sat around and watched, every single thing on Netflix? That's learning experience, as you said. And so I created this course to help show people how you can learn to dissect and analyze and use that for your writing, even if what I heard from a lot of writers at the beginning of this, with kids at home and people at home and everything shaken up and all the uncertainty we were feeling, was a lot of people weren't able to write. So that kickstarted this whole new avenue that's been going really well. And now I'm working on a second book for editing. I'm still doing the editing work, but I find I'm dividing up my day a bit more. So the mornings tend to be toward developing content for that sort of thing. And then in the afternoons, I'll work on actual projects. But I think they're essential, hand in hand. Like I talked to some people who have stopped doing the hands-on editing as their business changed. And to me, that's, as long as I've been doing this, I learn something new constantly. I'm constantly expanding my ideas and my theories about how to do this. I've been working with a couple of authors recently where we're working very intensely and closely, which is unusual, and going through almost scene by scene. And as we're doing it, I realized this whole huge thing about how to help authors analyze their plot and structure and make it work with strong momentum that I don't think you can learn any other way but by being hands-on. So I relish doing both.
And writing evolves, right?
Oh gosh, yeah.
So if you do stop editing, you're in danger of falling out of. I mean, if you read a book, I read a review actually. Someone reviewed my book, and I looked at it. He was like a big reviewer. We've got sort of an Amazon tick all over, and I looked at his previous reviews, and he picked up a John le Carre, which he reviewed last year, and said how dated it was. And how boring he found it compared to how books are written. That's the great John le Carre. So writing evolves, editing must evolve alongside it. So I think you're right to want to keep your hand in.
And that's another skill of being, hopefully when you hire a good developmental editor, not only do they have all the craft skills and the storytelling skills, you also want them to have marketing knowledge, as you said, what's selling, what's out there right now. And it changes so fast. Just if nothing else, our attention spans, I think, are getting shorter and shorter, which is changing so much for everything from chapter length to, there used to be really a lot of internality, internalism, I guess, in novels that you don't, I think readers check out now if you do that too much. Yeah,
no self-indulgent. It's got to be what's on the next page.
It didn't used to be considered self-indulgent, but now it is. In the era of the selfie, it's considered self-indulgent.
Well, look at some of the biggest selling authors of the James Pattersons and Dan Browns, and there's not a lot of fat in their writing, is there? That is just, it's just a skinny story to get you to turn the page. Okay, so let's talk about the book then, Tiffany. So what prompted you to write the book?
Mostly it was, so I love craft books like most of us do. You can see I have a whole shelf full of them back here. But so two things. I would hear authors say to me a lot, they would turn in a manuscript or contact me and say, I'm having trouble, but I religiously did whatever, Save the Cat or The Hero's Journey or, fill in the blank of all the different craft techniques that are out there. And over and over, I would see that it kind of homogenized the writing. And that isn't to say those aren't incredibly valuable tools, but each of them is a tool in your toolkit. It would be like having, a buzz saw and then going around sawing everything. You want a bunch of different things to draw from. And I think if you try to rigidly adhere to some system like that, it's almost writing from the outside in instead of from the inside out. And the way I work as an editor is that we're not trying to make your story adhere to any kind of structure or thing that we think it should be. We're trying to get to the nut, the seed of the story and your vision, and then put that on the page as clearly and effectively and impactfully as possible. So that was part of it. And then the other part is that as many craft books as there are out there, it's all writing directed. And I hear authors all the time say that they're intimidated by editing, they're overwhelmed by editing. Sometimes they don't even know what editing involves, like they'll finish writing and then they'll start from page 1, they'll go start polishing the prose, which is great. And I call that the sexy part of editing because that's the fun part. But it's like the HGTV reveal part where you're set dressing. It's not the structural stuff that needs to get done before that. And that's what I think we don't really learn how to do that. We're taught writing like all these craft skills and all the things we learn about storytelling are designed for the drafting stage of writing, and that's it. And then this editing becomes this necessary evil thing you have to do before you can get your book out. But to me, that is what writing is. It's the whole process. And the bulk of it, honestly, I think, is the editing and revising, which I differentiate between also. And I think if we could approach it that way more, I think a lot of authors get discouraged because writing is hard and it takes a lot to get not only a first draft, but then to polish it into something that you think is pretty good and ready for other eyes. And then often the journey's not over. That's the first base camp on Everett. You still got a long way to go, but it's not, I don't think it's onerous work. To me, it's the delight of taking this mine that you've created and then digging out more gold and polishing to mix metaphors, polishing all the facets into it that you can.
Yeah.
So I wanted to simplify that process. I wanted to make it seem not intimidating and say, this is just another part of your creative process of creating a story. And it can be the part where you really find the story you wanted to tell in the first place. Just to give you and your listeners an idea of how much the editing process factors in. If I'm working with a publisher who gives me a project, by the time, when your book is ready for publishing, or if you've ever submitted, by the time you get it ready to submit to an agent or a publisher, or to publish yourself, you have gone through this thing like crazy. Who knows? How many drafts did you do on yours?
At least 3 full drafts. And then
before you sent it to your editor?
Yeah. Well, I worked with a development editor redrafting.
Okay. So you've gone through however many passes on your own to get it to where it's even ready to go to a professional or to be published. And then let's say you do go with a traditional publisher. When I work with publishers, they hire me for at least 3 more passes.
Yeah.
Full passes. So you've got 3 really intense passes more. And then I have worked with authors where we've done up to like 6 more passes. So to me, that's perfectly normal. And that is the process. But I don't think we prepare writers for that. So it becomes this big wall in front of you when you thought you were finished.
Yeah. That's a really good mental state to be in, is to see that first big edit, the development edit, the revision, as an integral part of the process and not a chore. Mm-hmm. And it's something human nature doesn't want to hear about those problems because they can involve a lot of hard work to fix. It's not being told there's some commas in the wrong place is one thing, right? Being told the middle third runs out of steam. That's a big thing to say, well, that's a big rewrite. Well, so be it. But that's why I wonder how good we are at doing that to our own manuscripts. That's a challenge, isn't it? Because
I think it is.
You don't want to see those problems. You want to convince yourself it all works.
I think it's probably the biggest challenge. That's why I differentiate between editing and revising, because revising is the part that we're good at as writers. That's more of your writing skill. That's the stuff you already know how to do. You know how to create a character. You know how to develop a plot. You know how to create suspense and tension. But you have to get to the revising part. You have to do the editing part. I always say editing is assessing. Revising is addressing. So editing is the stuff you've got to learn how to get that objectivity on as much as possible on your own work so that you can take the step back, look at it and say, what's working? Where is it not working? Where's my vision not on the page? I do think that authors can learn to do that to a much greater degree. I don't know that you ever, I will tell you that I need feedback. I'm an editor. And when I'm writing, I need feedback. I need somebody to say, what did I miss? How's this coming across? So it's incredibly helpful. But I also, again, I hate to say, if you don't have several $1,000s to hire a developmental editor, then just throw in the towel. You can't have a career, because I do think there's other ways you can get that kind of feedback. It may not be as intensive. It may not be that expertise that you're looking for, but it shouldn't keep you from being able to enter that marketplace if you want to.
Yeah. When I said I worked alongside a development editor, more strictly speaking, it was a book coach, which is a slightly different thing, sort of ahead almost of the...
Add that to all those definitions we gave. So that's confusing.
Book coach is a more modern thing. I think it's used more by independent authors than others to help you with the... I mean, I'd written a draft when I first went to the book coach, but they didn't read the draft. They wanted to know the outline and the theme, and then we discussed the structure and plot, and then I redrafted. And I found that a very, very useful. In fact, it fundamentally changed the starting point of the novel and changed the way the novel worked, really. So
that's helpful. That would be like a story consultant in film, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly that. And Hollywood know what they're doing, right? They don't want stuff to get to the big screen with all that money that doesn't quite work, although I think that still does happen. But depends how untouchable the director is as to how much work can go on in that story.
Well, and two, I think every author's different. Like, I used to be in a critique group where we would turn in chapter by chapter. And after a while, I realized it was shutting me down, because this is another thing I talk about all the time. When you're writing, you need to be in the writer brain. When you're editing, be an editor brain. If you try to mix those two up, it's basically, if you're writing and the editor is looking over your shoulder, it's the equivalent of having someone flogging you the whole time going, don't you think that kind of sucks? Like, is that really what you wanted to say? Oh my God, what a stupid sentence that is. And creativity does not respond to the stick. It only responds to the carrot, at least for me and for most authors I know. So if I'm sitting there trying to create something while I am badgering myself the whole time about how crappy it is, I'm not going to be able to go any further. I'm going to second guess everything. So I was getting this feedback from people where, everybody's got an opinion, and good. I welcome those when I'm finished so that I can take it in. What is it? Neil Gaiman says that people who tell you something's not working, I'm paraphrasing horribly, something's not working in your story, they're usually right. But if they try to tell you what it is and how to fix it, they're usually wrong. So you have all these voices in a critique group telling you what's wrong with your story and how you should fix it. And I would lose my focus on the story I was trying to tell. But I know a lot of authors, that's incredibly helpful. A book coach can keep you on track. They can get you doing your word count. They can consult with you, like you said, when you're getting a little bit, when you may be sort of going down a dead end or off the track of the story. They can bring you back. They can help you consider things before you go down the rabbit hole. So I think it depends on what works for each author.
I think that's really a really good point. Because writing, you're right, is a different thing from editing. Writing's almost risk-taking, giving yourself the freedom to fail and explore and go mad. Editing is much less that, and much more.
I always joke that you should write like a dog and edit like a cat.
Yeah, well, of course.
Which means, get all like blah, slobbery and excited, and don't second guess yourself while you're writing. Just vomit it all up, and then that's the id, and then bring the super ego in, but leave the ego out of all of it.
Yes. And I think wasn't it Hemingway who said, write drunk, edit sober?
Yeah, same thing.
It's the same thing, the dog and cat. So the book, what's the book called again, Tiffany?
Intuitive Editing. The subtitle is A Creative and Practical Guide to Revising Your Writing.
And you're giving workshops and courses now as well. Where can people find you?
Oh, they can find me. Probably the easiest place is on my website. I've got a tab for online courses, and I've got on the homepage a list of where I'm doing presentations. I do like with Jane Friedman, and I'll do a lot of writers' conferences, virtual right now, but generally in person sometime. And that's always listed on there too. I've got a ton of resources for the authors on there too, most of them free, that will help you with craft books that can help you, with podcasts that will help, great writers' publications where you can find information that's useful. I also do every time I say this, I feel ridiculous at my age, but I have a YouTube channel called Editing Quick Tips, where I just offer these little nuggets of like things that you could incorporate into your writing that are just quick, easy ways, things to keep in mind to help strengthen your writing.
Well, I'm thinking we might talk to you about a webinar for our community. We've got 130,000 indie authors who are probably
I'd love that.
Very much benefit from, particularly, I think, you're right to pick out the fact that not everybody has, particularly at the beginning of their career, thousands to spend on book coaches and development editors. And the more that we can approach that from a structured way, from being the cat, not the dog at that stage, which is something I think you probably have to train yourself to be.
You do.
Some tips to do that. So if you were going to give some of those top tips to people who are, maybe in their first draft at the moment, what... this is towards the end of the interview, so we haven't got another hour for this bit, but I know you could talk for an hour here.
I know. Did you see me light up?
Yeah. What are the top tips about approaching that, about fixing problems?
I'll try to give you the quick and dirties. If you asked me like the top, maybe let's say 3 things, I call it the Holy Trinity, which is character, stakes, and plot. With character, if readers do not care what's happening unless we care who it's happening to. So it's really important that you create fully fleshed, believable, 3-dimensional characters who desperately want something, who have formidable obstacles in their way, who will fight like hell to get that thing. And then that brings us to stakes. If they don't care profoundly about whatever it is they're trying to get or avoid, readers do not care. So make sure you keep stakes high and you build them throughout the story. And then plot, if you have a fantastic character and huge stakes, but they just spin their wheels, you have to take us on a journey. Otherwise it's like getting on a plane and going on a flight and then getting off in the same town where you boarded. You've got to take the reader somewhere, and plot is the vehicle to do that. And your character has to change as a direct result of the plot of what they go through over the course of the story. Those are my quick and dirties.
Fantastic. That's a really good summary. And I'm sure I'm doing the same as everybody else and going over my current work in progress thinking, yes, am I doing
And then
that?
the one more thing that's not craft related necessarily, but I say this all the time, be kind and gentle with yourself. I truly don't think you can berate or flog or criticize yourself into a great story. It gets there the way it gets there. That's part of the process. Nobody has to see it until it's where you want it. And it takes time and effort and work, and you have to really stink it up before it gets really good. But you can't fix a blank page, to be a big fat cliche. So just don't judge yourself. Go easy on yourself. Know that it's a process, and you'll get there.
Yeah, that's great. Encourage yourself. Be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
On that
You're
front.
your own biggest champion. You're the only one you've got in this business.
And I think for a lot of authors, and I probably include myself there, that's not something we naturally are good at. We're much better at feeling guilty about not doing things, or guilty about getting it wrong, and feeling like there's a black cloud there that we haven't fixed, rather than thinking, do you know what? A lot of what you've done is really good and is going to be getting you to where you need to be. So another good tip. And first drafts, again, probably Hemingway said everyone's first draft is shit. And that's,
Yes, he did.
And that's, and then there's one of the great writers of the American novels. So fantastic. Well, Tiffany, it's been brilliant, absorbing to talk to you. I really feel that we've barely scratched the surface on this subject. And let's have a chat off air about potentially bringing you to do a 45-minute, 1-hour webinar with our folks on a structured approach to the revision process in particular. We've got Jenny Nash who does that brilliantly as well. But
yes, she does.
Yeah, we'll always benefit from more advice and help in that area. So let's see if we can sort that out for the future.
great. Thanks so much for having me on. I love the show. I love getting to finally be a guest on it.
Hey, Tiffany, it's been our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Take care of yourself, James.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
There you go. Thank you to our guest, Tiffany Yates Martin. Such an important part of the drafting, the composition of your book. For me, probably more than you, Mark. I think, you're a pretty old hand at this by now, but for someone like me and lots of people, I think, listen to this podcast, that's really where the juice is, that revision stage where you turn your first draft into, from a rough and ready state to a hopefully polished manuscript. And that process you can't skimp on, and it's part of the learning process, and it will certainly in my case has helped me write my next draft much better than the first draft of my first book, going through that process. But yeah, I think we've had this conversation before. You don't use development editors anymore, but you obviously do go through some sort of process.
I don't use developmental editors, but yeah, I do. I kind of, as I get to the end of Wormwood, so I'm kind of coming to the, I suppose, 2/3 through it now. So I've got the kind of the conclusion to write. Because I'm going away next week and I won't have my usual setup, so I write with multiple screens and I have a certain understanding desk and all that, which is very useful for me if I'm going to be spending 5 hours at a desk. What I will probably do next week is go back to the start, and I'll just have my laptop and a keyboard, and I'll just start to kind of work on the stuff that I've got before, which has always been my favorite bit. So I did a bit yesterday, and there was one of the characters used to work in the Soviet nuclear weapons program, but I've moved him into a slightly different program, which makes more sense for what comes later. And I only knew to do that because I've written the bit that comes later. So now I can go back and names will change, relationships will change, things that might have happened will change. And because I know what I've got to aim at the end now, I have to get everything to be consistent. So now that I have that knowledge of what needs to be done, this bit is quite fun. So just kind of going back through it and tightening it up, correcting errors, bit of research. This is one of the best bits for me.
Yeah, good. So when are you slating that?
Well, it's going to be, I think, probably, because I'm away next week, so I won't do much fresh writing, and then we're off to Vegas, touch wood, in 2 weeks' time. I don't think I'll do that much more kind of heavy work on it. So probably, I think it'll be out by Christmas.
Okay.
It might be out kind of very late November, early December would be my guess at the moment.
And it won't go into a series on Amazon. Your John Milton is a distinct series. For people who don't write in series, you can create them on your bookshelf so that readers on Amazon can see the series, the rest of it. This will be a standalone.
This will, yeah. So it's going to be, it's in the world. It's kind of the Group 15 book. So there's another one I did set around the a heist in East Berlin called The Vault, which was, again, it's in the world. There's a character, a quite important character appears in that book that then becomes a character in the Milton series. So this is just like that, but it won't be kind of in the Milton series officially, but it's definitely canon. But readers who like it will go and buy both.
You can add a title as not main content to a series.
You can. Yeah, I've never used that before. I might have to look into exactly what that allows me to
I don't know whether that's like behind the scenes or would be a book that fits this description.
Yeah.
It's in the universe. But yes, that's a box you can tick when you're creating your series. Is it main content, i.e. this is book 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or is it an additional in the series without a number? Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you very much. You can tell I've been heads down in Fuse books for much of this week in my KDP dashboard. I've quite enjoyed bringing some new series out. And we can talk about that. Perhaps we should do an episode soon because we've been busy on Fuse. We can talk about the process of bringing those books to market. And welcoming Ian W. Sainsbury's books, which are now live both in print and ebook form. His Jimmy Blue series. Gone through a bit of a transformation since he joined Fuse, but it is the Jimmy Blue series, and we'll properly launch that with a marketing effort next week, which I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. And then and another author are ready to join as well, so we're slowly adding to the stable.
We are
hopefully selling lots more books.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Okay, thank you very much indeed to our guest Tiffany Yates Martin out there in Austin, Texas, and thank you to Mark Dawson in Salisbury, Wilts. Does it? Yes, it does. And James Blatch in Godmanchester Camps. All that remains for me to say is it's a goodbye from him.
And a goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/selfpublishingshow. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, so get your words into the world and join the revolution with the Self-Publishing Show.